In practice, not a single shelf and floor acoustics can accurately and fully reproduce the bass range of music. Often, the use of a subwoofer in a music system is associated with mumbling, humming with drums hitting the wrong way. In order to avoid negative effects and get the best sound quality when using a subwoofer, you need to know just 3 things. First, what type of subwoofer you need according to your musical preferences. Second, how to properly connect the selected subwoofer. Third, how to properly install and set up a subwoofer in order to get the maximum sound quality from your stereo or home cinema. Most acoustic systems are not able to reproduce the lowest frequency range that starts from 20 Hz and ends around 70 to 80 Hz. In this diagram, I want to show you the frequency response of a bad speaker system. Here you can see that the decline in the low frequency range begins immediately after 100 Hz and up to 20 Hz it works with an unevenness of more than 20 and even 30 decibels. Also, on this speaker system, there is a decline at high frequencies, after 10,000 Hz. This graph shows the sound of a very bad speaker system and I took it for clarity. When using a subwoofer, our task is to provide the maximum drop zone with sound pressure. In a normal, modern, speaker system, floor standing or shelf, the roll-off usually starts after 50 Hz. On some, especially high-quality systems, the roll-off begins below 35 Hz and this is no longer so noticeable. But in this case, the decline begins after 100 Hz, and this means that most likely this speaker system is a satellite. It is interesting that most of the measurements that I found on the internet, about the unevenness of the amplitude-frequency characteristic, correspond to a sound pressure of 90 decibels. I will tell you about this a bit later. Also, an important factor affecting our perception of sound, that is, the music we listen to, is the susceptibility of human hearing to various frequencies. This graph shows the sensitivity of human hearing to different frequencies. As you can see, at a sound pressure of about 40 decibels, which corresponds to a quiet room, human hearing is basically unable to perceive low-frequency waves that are below 500 Hz. No, we certainly hear them. But in order to hear a 20 Hz or 30 Hz bass at a noise level of a quiet room of 40 decibels, we need this bass to sound 30 to 40 decibels louder than all other sounds. Interestingly, the uneven perception of human hearing with an increase in volume, that is, an increase in sound pressure, levels out. As you can see on the graph, around 90 decibels, the human ear begins to hear sounds almost evenly. We hear the bass, we hear the middle, we hear the high frequencies quite well. To listen to music at home, you need a volume level that corresponds to approximately 60 to 70 decibels. This is a volume level that approximately equals the volume of a conversation between 2 or 3 people. If you cross the border of 80 decibels and set the sound pressure, that is, the volume of your audio system, to 90 decibels, then this behavior can already be regarded as antisocial, and you will most likely have problems with your neighbors. Maybe even stabbing and calling the police. Because if you set the volume of your audio system to 90 or more decibels in your apartment building, then the whole house will most likely suffer from the noise. In order to compensate for the lack of human hearing and the shortcomings of speaker systems, in order to obtain a full-fledged, full-scale, high-quality sound, in my opinion, in any speaker system, no matter floor or bookshelf, a subwoofer is needed. Because this gray zone is a zone of non-perception of low-frequency waves. If we are talking about the amplitude-frequency characteristic of acoustic systems, then in order for a person to fully perceive the sound range, the amplitude-frequency characteristic of acoustic systems should be like this. To fully compensate for all the shortcomings of human hearing that I told you about earlier. In fact, Everything happens in a completely different way in our life, and the acoustic systems simply repeat the shortcomings of our human hearing. Perhaps speaker manufacturers make speakers that do not reproduce the lowest frequency range, precisely because they know perfectly well that a person simply does not hear those frequencies that are at the very bottom of the range. Interestingly, to compensate for the lack of the human ear, in many vintage amplifiers, the loudness function was used. When the loudness button was pressed, low frequency and high frequency signals were amplified, and this circuit made it possible to compensate for the lack of human hearing, which does not hear low and high frequencies at low volume. At the same time, when increasing the volume level on the amplifier, the loudness function automatically decreased, because at a volume level of about 80 to 90 decibels, we begin to hear almost the entire frequency range more or less evenly. Subwoofers can be divided into two main types: active subwoofers with a built-in amplifier and passive subwoofers. They do not have a built-in amplifier and filter. Passive subwoofers are usually used in a professional environment, and a person who uses a passive subwoofer independently chooses a filter, independently chooses an amplifier, independently chooses how and to what to connect a passive subwoofer. At home, usually, active-type subwoofers are used with a built-in amplifier. About how to properly connect an active subwoofer to your stereo or 5 or more channel audio system, I will tell you a little later. Also, subwoofers can be divided into two more types. These are phase inverter subwoofers. In this case, the slot at the bottom is a phase inverter. Phase inverters can be slot-like or round. They can be directed forward, backward, down. Also, the subwoofer can be built as a closed box. There are significant differences in sound between a phase inverter subwoofer and a closed-type subwoofer. For example, phase inverter subwoofers tend to produce deeper bass. As a rule, this bass is not as accurate as that of closed-type subwoofers, and phase inverter subwoofers with a smaller box volume create more sound pressure. Because the subwoofer diaphragm has the ability to work in one direction, and the reverse side of the diaphragm also creates sound pressure, but which we hear and feel already through the phase inverter. Closed-back subwoofers deliver faster, tighter, crisper bass. But this bass is quantitatively less than that of an open-type subwoofer. Closed-type subwoofers require a more careful approach to amplification, because the subwoofer diaphragm is in a closed case and it does not have the ability to move as freely as the subwoofer diaphragm with a phase inverter. Inside the box there is a constant pressure, and therefore, when choosing an amplifier for a closed-type subwoofer, you need to try very hard. Also, the closed-type subwoofer works out cinematic low-frequency effects more quickly, and sometimes you want the explosion to be a little stretched out in time. Sometimes you want the catastrophe that happens on your screen to last longer. For example, in my home system has two subwoofers. One, a closed-type subwoofer, a closed box that is installed next to the front speakers. I use this subwoofer for listening to music and watching movies. The second subwoofer is a phase inverter. It is located on the line of the rear speakers, and I use it only when watching a movie, because when listening to music, the phase inverter subwoofer produces such a stretched, lingering bass, which, it seems to me, is not always on time. But at the same time, when listening to a movie, this small subwoofer, which is installed in the rear speaker line, gives such a shuddering and lingering, powerful bass effect that the sofa on which we watch movies as a family just shakes. At the same time, the bass from the enclosed subwoofer that sits in front of the front speaker line delivers tight, fast, accurate bass. But it does not give the feeling of immersion in the cinema. Rather, it gives but not fully. Phase inverter subwoofers and subwoofers in a closed box are good, but each is good in its own way, and when choosing a subwoofer, you need to clearly understand what kind of bass you want: powerful, deep, and a little bit lingering. Then choose a phase inverter subwoofer. Or you want fast, hard, crisp bass. Then you need to choose a closed-type subwoofer in a closed box. Also, there are horn-type subwoofers. There are open-type subwoofers whose speaker is not enclosed in any case at all. There are also subwoofers with a labyrinth-type phase inverter. But let's leave subwoofers of this type for fetishists who catch the smallest nuances from the sound. There are two main methods in connecting subwoofers. The first is high precision. The second one is low. We start with the high precision method. When using a high precision connection method, we take an acoustic cable, connect it to the acoustic terminals of our amplifier. We connect the second end of the speaker cable to our speaker systems. In this case, I have already connected the cable to the speakers. Thus, we get the usual connection of acoustics. In order for the subwoofer to receive a low-frequency signal from our amplifier, we need a second speaker cable, which we first connect to our amplifier. We connect the second end of the speaker cable to our speaker systems. In this case, I have already connected the cable to the speakers. Thus, we get the usual connection of acoustics. In order for the subwoofer to receive a low-frequency signal from our amplifier, we need a second speaker cable, which we first connect to our amplifier. Naturally, plus to plus, minus to minus, and then I connect the other end of the cable to the input terminals of our subwoofer. Thus, we performed a parallel connection. That is, the signal from the acoustic terminals of the amplifier is sent to the speaker system that operates in the upper middle and low frequency range, and the signal is also sent to the subwoofer. The subwoofer, in this case, filters out the low frequency signal with the help of filters and amplifies it. I will tell you about how to set up the filter a little later when I talk about setting up a subwoofer. You need to do the high precision connection procedure for the left and right channels, because both the left and right channels must be connected to the subwoofer to the corresponding jacks. The second connection method is low precision. The low precision connection method is suitable for connecting amplifiers that have a pre-out output, and it is suitable for connecting a subwoofer to home cinemas that have a so-called LFE output, that is, low frequency effect or sub-out output. Such an output is available on most receivers, home cinemas, and on most modern streamers. We take a regular RCA cable and connect it to the pre-out output of our amplifier, respectively. In this case, I use an integrated amplifier in which there is simply a pre-out output. When connecting to the pre-out output, keep in mind that the volume on this output is controlled using the knob on your amplifier. That is, when you increase the volume on the amplifier, this pre-out also increases the volume. We connect the second end of our cable to the input of our subwoofer, that is, in is written on the subwoofer. There, we connect our signal. As with the high precision connection, the subwoofer needs to be tuned after the low precision connection. I will tell you how to do this in the section when I talk about setting up a subwoofer. Be sure to keep in mind that the high precision connection method is only suitable for stereo amplifiers that do not have a built-in filter, because most receivers, home cinemas and streamers that have a sub-out or pre-out output, have also a built-in low-pass filter, and if you turn on the filter that is built into the receiver or in the streamer, then you will not have a low-frequency signal on the acoustic terminals and, accordingly, the subwoofer will have nothing to amplify. If you want to use a high-precision connection method in your home cinema or in the receiver, then be sure to go into the settings of your receiver or home cinema and make sure that the filter is turned off in order for a full-fledged signal to be sent to the acoustic terminals. The number of subwoofers used in your system may vary. For example, most use only one subwoofer. The use of one subwoofer in a home stereo system or in a home cinema creates an uneven sound field. That is, the subwoofer works, music plays, the movie plays, you walk around the room, move to the right or to the left, or move back and forth and feel that somewhere you have more bass, and somewhere you have less bass. This is due to the fact that the sound waves reproduced by the subwoofer are also reflected in the room in which you listen to music or watch a movie. There is zoning of the room according to bass frequencies. Somewhere the bass is heard better, somewhere the bass is heard worse. Also, it is necessary to take into account that on the receivers the sub-out output is two channels that are mixed with each other. The right and left are connected in one channel, and it is desirable to place the subwoofer, if possible, in the center between the speakers. Otherwise, some people who are particularly sensitive may hear all the bass coming from the left or right, from where you've put the subwoofer. But in fact, studies show that at the lowest frequencies, the human ear is unable to determine the direction of the sound. You can put the subwoofer to the right, to the left, in front, behind. But you still don't understand where it actually is. Because the bass wavelength is so long that we don't really feel this difference within our apartment, within our room. And of course, to get the most clean, high-quality stereo picture, it is advisable to use two subwoofers that you have near the left speaker system and near the right speaker system, so that each stereo channel is amplified by a separate subwoofer. Actually, it's not that critical. But for sound purists, this can be important. Well, here are some of the secrets about installing a subwoofer indoors I already told you. In the Unison's salon, at 38 Gertrude Street in Riga, I have already been consulted several times on how to install a subwoofer, and my experience has developed with the experience of Vladimir, who organizes trade here, and now you will hear how to install a subwoofer correctly. When installing a subwoofer, there are a few things to consider. The most important question: what do you want to get from your subwoofer? For example, if you want to get the highest quality, most adequate sound from your stereo system or home cinema, then the subwoofer should be installed in line with the front speakers, as close as possible to the speaker in order to get into phase. Otherwise, if your subwoofer is pushed back, or pushed forward, or pushed to the side, then the sound phase will shift and the low-frequency signal erupted by the subwoofer will arrive at your audiophile ears either earlier or later than the mid-frequency and high-frequency signals. This is sure to make you uncomfortable if you really feel the music and understand how it sounds. For many people, out-of-phase subwoofers do not cause any discomfort at all. They throw a subwoofer somewhere, the main thing for them is to hear the beat. But for example, for me, it is important that the subwoofer does not boom. It is important for me that the subwoofer complements the sound of the speakers with the lowest bass, creating fundamentality and creating the scale of the musical canvas that I see when listening to music. The second option for installing a subwoofer is in a corner. If for some reason your subwoofer is small, and you want to get the most out of it, then the subwoofer can be placed in a corner. Of course, when installing a subwoofer in a corner, we are no longer talking about some kind of audiophile pleasure and sound accuracy. It's about increasing the amount of bass you can get from a small subwoofer. According to objective estimates, when installing a subwoofer in a corner, its return can be increased by 2 or even 3 times. If quality is not very important to you, but quantity is needed, no one will forbid installing a subwoofer in a corner. To adjust it, gradually push it forward until you get the best possible result. After you have chosen, you connected the subwoofer and put it where it is convenient for you, or where you really need to put it to get the highest quality sound, the subwoofer needs to be adjusted. To adjust the subwoofer, as a rule, 3 knobs are used on the back of the subwoofer. One of those knobs is the subwoofer volume. Well, you understand, the more you turn this knob clockwise, the more bass you get. If you want the bass to really dominate all the music you listen to, be sure to set this knob to its fullest. I did this, but it did not bring me any joy, because the dominant bass is very unpleasant. In fact, the subwoofer itself does not play. It makes uterine, low-frequency sounds that, apart from the rest of the music, do not carry any quality information. Usually, when I set up subwoofers at home, well, or not at home, at first I set the volume knob to about 1/3. Then I adjust depending on the music that I listen to. Because there are music recordings that have low bass, there are music recordings that have exaggerated bass. When setting up a subwoofer, you need to listen to both, and catch a certain middle option on the subwoofer, which, when listening to all your favorite songs, will not force you to turn the subwoofer over and turn the volume knob. The second knob on the subwoofer is the cutoff frequency. Depending on the lower frequency limit of your shelf or floor-standing speakers, the cutoff frequency must be set to cover the low frequency roll-off of your speakers. You can see this information in the passport for your acoustic systems, if you want. I usually set the cutoff frequency to about 60 to 80 Hz, no higher. On subwoofers, you can set the cutoff frequency, if I'm not mistaken, up to 180 Hz, but in fact, 180 Hz for a woofer is not the frequency at which it works well. From 20 to a maximum of 60 to 80 Hz. This is the range that you need in order for the subwoofer to create a massive, assertive sound. So that it supplements it with a high-quality full-weight foundation, and then you will hear the music in a completely different key. If the frequency range of your acoustics goes down even to 40 Hz, you can set the subwoofer to a cutoff frequency of 20 to 40 Hz, complementing your speaker system in the lowest range. But in any case, setting the cutoff to 60 to 80 Hz will not make a mistake if you do not know the passport characteristics of your speaker system. The third knob, or the switch that is on the subwoofer, in this case the knob, is the phase. Phase is a very important element when setting up a subwoofer. On most subwoofers there is simply a switch 0 and 180 where 0 corresponds to placing the subwoofer in line with the speakers, 180 corresponds to either pushing forward or behind the speakers. Here, again, it is necessary to experiment strictly by ear, how the subwoofer is installed and what it gives you there. With this subwoofer, I see that it is possible to adjust the phase quite accurately from 0 to 180 degrees. This allows for very precise installation and tuning of the subwoofer. The phase, as I said, is the moment at which the signals of the entire frequency spectrum arrive at your ears. If any of the signals, either low frequency, high frequency, or mid frequency, arrives at you earlier or later, then you begin to experience some kind of incomprehensible discomfort and music no longer brings you pleasure. In most modern home cinemas, receivers have an auto-calibration feature. Feel free to run it and auto-calibration will adjust the amplitude-frequency response. That is, the receiver itself will adjust the volume of the subwoofer, it will build the cutoff frequency inside the receiver, so that the amplitude-frequency response in your room is as even as possible. In the case of stereo amplifiers, you need to be guided strictly by ear and adjust the volume and cut strictly by ear. Also, phase adjustment is practically impossible with the help of instruments, and you can only adjust the phase by ear. To do this is pretty simple. You turn on music in which, for example, only drums work, rhythmically 1 beat, 2, 3, 4 and try to hear if your subwoofer and speaker system are working absolutely synchronously. You can turn off the subwoofer, listen to the acoustics, you can turn off the acoustics, listen to the subwoofer, then turn it on together and listen to whether they sound at the same time and turn the phase knob to ensure that the acoustics and the subwoofer sound absolutely synchronously. If your subwoofer does not have smooth phase adjustment, there is only a switch for 0 and 180, then the second method of adjustment is to move the subwoofer a little forward or a little back, depending on the circumstances in which you are. When at your usual listening position you begin to hear synchronized drum beats from the acoustics and from the subwoofer, then your speaker system is all set. When your subwoofer is set up correctly and works in harmony with the stereo system, no matter what kind of speakers you have, shelf or floor standing, then you can listen to music quite calmly while being in a sound pressure field of 60 to 70 decibels. At the same time, you will hear well and comfortably the entire bass range, which, firstly, cannot be heard at a low volume level due to the characteristics of the human ear, and which most shelf and floor acoustic systems cannot reproduce for various technical reasons. Using a subwoofer will close the frequency zone that we cannot hear. Watch the new video on how to get the best sound quality. Bye.